In the last episode, we observed that contrary to the perception of ourselves as modern rational thinking beings, we process information almost entirely through the filter of narrative, and that values, rather than rationality, play a major role in our decision making. Values precede data. The very fact that scientific endeavour exists at all is, in the first instance, a result of values, the value in this case being the truth. The axiomatic proposition that the truth exists and can be discerned and divined through inquiry and investigation is already the result of a value, a belief that the truth exists and can be known. Indeed, Aristotle would say that human beings are teleologically orientated toward it, which is why, incidentally, I'm doing this podcast. The ancients used stories to inculcate values such as valour, bravery, virtue and heroism into the younger generation with a view to propagating and perpetuating their own culture and civilization. Countries tell origin stories to imbue their citizenry with a sense of fidelity and to elicit loyalty and fealty to a higher good. The Spanish might tell their young of El Cid, the Catholic kings, Christopher Columbus. The French might boast of the Normans, Joan of Arc, Napoleon, or the French Revolution. Citizens of the US of George Washington and the Founding Fathers. In our own case, Ireland, one thinks of mythological heroes such as Cuchulainn, or real ones such as Brian Boru, Hugh O'Neill, Daniel O'Connell, the Liberator, Charles Stewart Parnell, and more recently the revolutionaries of the 1916 Rising and the stirring Proclamation of Independence. The 1916 Rising is particularly apt because it offers us the chance to see how, by applying a different set of values to the same set of facts, one can construct an entirely different narrative. Upon their surrender, the 1916 revolutionaries were scorned by local citizenry. The prevailing narrative ran something like this: Britain is on the cusp of giving us home rule, a stepping stone toward a republic. To a greater degree, Britain's involvement in the Great War was predicated on the desire to vindicate and defend smaller countries' right to self-determination and sovereignty. 200,000 young Irishmen had signed up to further that noble cause, and here now were some brigands, I believe the locals called them shinners after they surrendered, stabbing the authorities in the back, while their fellow countrymen were fighting with the Brits to advance the cause of sovereignty elsewhere, in the hope that the authorities might more readily cede control of Ireland to the Irish after the war. Civilians died in the 1916 Rising, including a small breastfed baby, as the rebels moved from one residential building to another before they surrendered. In sum, a group of radicals caused mayhem, disturbed the peace, caused the death of innocent civilians, and betrayed their fellow countrymen abroad, all for the sake of their foolish rebellion and their megalomaniac regard for themselves. This narrative reflects more or less the prevailing feeling of the ordinary citizen at the time of the Rising. But, if you read the textbooks of today, this narrative is but a footnote in the one that succeeded it. Today we see the revolutionaries as visionaries, poets, leaders, heroes shaking the country out of our indolent torpor, and, to paraphrase a line from Braveheart, forcing us to stop squabbling for the scraps from Westminster's table and to fight for our God-given right to something better. The important thing to note here is there is no factual contradiction between both narratives. Rather, the values framework has changed, such that those initially cast as villains are now remembered as heroes. The comparison between the fluctuating narratives of the 1916 Rising and the contrasting narratives regarding the Hamas-Israel conflict is useful in outlining how the same set of facts can be interpreted according to a different framework of values. But there is a very basic flaw in the analogy. That is, what is happening in the contemporary conflict is not just a crafting of narrative according to values. It is, but it's more. It is a narrative based mainly on lies and falsehoods. So let's expose the lies first and then move on to the exaggerated, context-void facts, because the most dangerous lie is the half-truth, or, in this case, the 1/20th truth. To most Irish people, the slogan "Give Palestine back to the Palestinians" seems to resonate with sentiments expressed in the proclamation of independence in respect of our own country, the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland. But has an independent and sovereign Palestine ever existed? The name Palestine derives from the ancient enemy of Israel, the Philistines. The Romans superimposed the name Syria Palestina on Israel after the suppression of the Simon Bar Kokhba revolt of 136 AD to insult and humiliate the Jews and to erase Israel from the map and the annals of history. Emperor Hadrian then preceded the biggest expulsion of Jews from their homeland since the Babylonian exile centuries before. The following is a timeline of ruling authorities over the territory from the above-mentioned period to the creation of the modern state of Israel. So from 136 AD to 390 AD, it's still under the Roman Empire. Following the Bar Kokhba revolt, the province is renamed Syria Palestina. From 390 AD to 638 AD, Palestine, became part of the Byzantine Empire, being split into provinces like Palestina Prima, Seconda and Tertia. Jerusalem became a major Christian centre. Then, 638 AD to 1099 AD, the region was conquered by the Rashidun Caliphate, followed by the Umayyad Caliphate, the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Fatimid Caliphate. Then we move on to 1099 AD to 1187 AD, which is the Crusader era. Established during the First Crusade, the Kingdom of Jerusalem controlled much of the region until its defeat by Saladin. 1187 AD to 1250 AD, the Ayyubid Sultanate. Founded by Saladin, the Ayyubids retook control of most of the Holy Land. 1250 AD to 1517 AD, the Mamluk Sultanate. The Mamluks, a military ruling class based in Egypt, defeated the Ayyubids and the Mongols to establish control over Palestine. 1517 AD to 1917 AD, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans conquered the Mamluks, and Palestine was ruled as part of Ottoman Syria for roughly 4 centuries. 1917 AD to 1948 AD, British military administration and mandate. Britain occupied the region during World War I. The British mandate for Palestine was formally established by the League of Nations in 1922, lasting until the declaration of the State of Israel in May 1948. There is no historical record of any self-governing or even semi-self-governing Palestinian state, nor is there much by way of documented evidence as to a distinct Palestinian people inhabiting the land. What little written evidence we have from dynasties such as the Ottomans regarding inhabitants' ethnicity suggests that, while the land remains sparsely populated, the Jews who remained in Palestine were by no means a minority with respect to Arabs or Christians. The 17th century Dutch scholar Adrian Relland wrote the work Palestrina ex monumentis veteribus illustrata. According to Miran Offer of Medium, the book is a historical and archaeological work published in 1714 and is a comprehensive study of ancient Palestine, focusing on its geography, history and culture. Relland conducted extensive research and utilised a wide range of ancient sources, including biblical texts, classical literature and inscriptions, to shed light on the region's past. The author was a geographer, cartographer, traveller and philologist. He was fluent in a number of European languages, as well as Arabic, Ancient Greek, Hebrew and Latin. In the book, Relland describes the 1695 status of what is considered modern-day Palestine. He surveyed almost 2,500 villages mentioned in the Bible or the Talmud. The research was conducted as follows. He created the first Palestine map, then he documented every village mentioned in the Bible or the Talmud by its original name. If the source was Jewish, it was described by the verse, that is, the sources in the Holy Scriptures that mentioned this name. If the source was Roman or Greek, it was described as Latin. He conducted a census of villages. So the main facts and conclusions. The country is mostly deserted and thin in population. Most of the population reside in Jerusalem, Acre, Cephad, Jaffa, Tiberias and Gaza. Most of the population comprised of Jews, with most of the rest as Christians. There are not many Muslims, mostly Bedouins travelling all over the Levant, except the city of Neapolis, that holds 120 members of the Muslim family of Nacha and about 70 Samaritans. In Nazareth, the capital of Galilee, lives about 700 people, all Christians. In Jerusalem, there's about 5,000 people, mostly Jews and a few Christians. In the year 1695, everyone knew the origin of the country as Jewish. There isn't a single Palestine village with a name that has Arabic origin. Most villages' names had Jewish origins and in some cases Latin, Greek or Roman. Except the city of Ramla, there is no Arabic village with an original Arabic name. Jewish, Greek or Latin names that were changed to Arabic have no meaningful Arabic name. In Arabic, there is no meaning to names like Acre, Haifa, Jaffa, Nablus, Gaza or Jenin. Names like Ramallah, El Halil, Hebron, Al-Quds, Jerusalem, have no philologue or historical roots. For example, Ramallah was called Bet El, House of God in Hebrew, and the Cave of the Patriarchs was called by the Arabs El Halil, an alias to the name Abraham. Relent mentions Muslims only as Bedouins coming to the cities as seasonal agricultural or building workers. In Gaza, there's about 550 people, half Jewish and half Christians. Jews keep vineyards, olives and grow wheat, while Christians practice commerce and transportation. In Tiberias and Cephad, there were Jews, but their occupation is not mentioned except for the traditional fishing in the Sea of Galilee. For example, in the village of el Falem, there were 10 families, all Christian. The village has a Maronite church. The book disproves completely any theories of Palestinian heritage or Palestinian people and leaves no connection between the land and Arabs. According to the blurb of the book on Amazon, the book is an illustrated 18th century Latin book and an exhaustive geographical and historical survey of ancient Palestine based on the author's extensive field research and scholarly analysis of ancient texts and artefacts. It includes detailed maps, drawings and engravings of the region, as well as descriptions of its flora, fauna and topography. The book is a valuable resource for historians, archaeologists and anyone interested in ancient Near Eastern culture and history. The work has been selected by scholars as being culturally important and is part of the knowledge base of civilization, as we know it. Another online review of the book asserts that much of its content corroborates the work of Joan Peters in From Time Immemorial, The Origins of the Arab-Jewish Conflict over Palestine. Critics contend that Relent never actually visited Palestine himself, but in any case he corroborated his work from various secondary sources. Nonetheless, the fact remains that Palestine was never a sovereign or self-governing state, neither in the old-fashioned monarchical sense, nor in the modern pluralistic, secular, democratic sense. Some online commentators advance a similar argument against the existence of a sovereign Ireland, claiming that neither did a self-governing Ireland exist until the 20th century, but that is patently false. While Britain was still under Roman occupation, the Irish had their own system, primitive though it was, but a system nonetheless of self-governance, a series of interdependent fiefdoms and little kingdoms, loosely bound together under fealty to an overlord and Tara. Indeed, the decisive event that set Patrick, Apostle of Ireland, apart from his predecessor missionaries, was that he managed to convince the High King of Tara, Lear MacNeill, to allow the practice of Christianity in his domain. The granting of MacNeill's permission paved the way for the rest of the island to be evangelised, as other smaller fiefdoms and underlords followed suit, much as Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire after the Edict of Milan granted tolerance to Christianity around 314 AD. Another reason Patrick succeeded where others had failed was that during his time of enslavement he had learned to speak Gaelic, thus enabling him to preach to the Irish when he returned as bishop in their native tongue. These two facts are pertinent as they attest to the existence of a structured hierarchical self-governing land and the existence of a distinct language, neither of which can be said of Palestine as some faux historians contend. The existence of an autonomous, self-governing people is further evidenced by the form in which Christianity spread through Ireland, that is, via monastic settlements. Local lords and chieftains saw the monks as bearing no threat to their temporal power, and therefore allowed them to subsist within their respective jurisdictions as monastic settlements rather than diocesan entities. Though it isn't within the scope of this episode, another important fact to note is the existence of Brehon law, the system of legal code used by early Celtic people to resolve disputes, and lest we forget the legal dispute between two early medieval Irish monks, St. Columba and St. Finian, over a new translation of the Book of Psalms by St. Jerome, which St. Columba had copied without permission from St. Finian. The High King of Ireland was called upon to arbitrate, and his famous pronouncement, "The gach bo of Winin, the gach lower a chop, to every cow's calf, to every bucket's copy," is recorded as the first known case of copyright. You get the picture. The point is, there is no equivalent legal or self-governing system in the area known as Palestine subsequent to the expulsion of the Jewish ruling classes in the 2nd century AD, such that there is no valid historical basis connecting the slogan, "Give Palestine back to the Palestinians," to the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland. Moreover, any imagined commonality of purpose between Irish republicanism and its faux Palestinian equivalent is further undermined by a subsequent line in the Constitution which many pro-Palestinian advocates would happily ignore because of its uncomfortable appropriateness to the Zionist cause. I quote from the Irish Proclamation of Independence: "The long usurpation of that right," i.e. to the right of the ownership of land by a people, "the long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished the right." And the following caveat is unfortunately equally apt in the case of the Jewish people: "Nor can it ever be extinguished except by the destruction of the Irish people." Ergo, the raison d'etre of Hamas, the PLO, and every other jihadist terrorist group regarding Israel. And the connection between the Zionist cause and the Irish Republican cause is a historical fact. In this regard, I'm very grateful, and I am in debt to Jamie O'Mahony for his knowledge in this area and for sharing his knowledge with me in this area, which, if you go back to episode 3, you can hear more of. Yitzhak Herzog, Chief Rabbi of Ireland from 1921 to 1936, known as the Sinn Féin Rabbi, spoke Irish and Hebrew and saw Irish republicanism and Zionism as common causes, both fighting for independence against the colonial power that was the British government. Rabbi Herzog went on to become the Chief Rabbi of British Mandate Palestine until the establishment of the State of Israel. His son became President of Israel, and his grandson, Isaac Herzog, is the current incumbent President of Israel and the only foreign head of state entitled to an Irish passport. Robert Briscoe, Fianna Fáil TD and Jewish Irishman, also saw Zionism and Irish republicanism as common causes, and, writing in the early 20th century, A. de Blockham declared, "Israel represents the triumph of Sinn Féin." Both the nationalist movement of the late 19th century in Ireland and its Zionist counterpart sought to revive the respective languages of their people. During the British Mandate Palestine, the Yishuv began forging a national identity through the revival of Hebrew as a spoken language, much as the Gaelic revival here sought to revive the Irish language. In reality, the only genuine link between Ireland and Arabs in Palestine, Palestinians, is much more recent and is rooted in terrorism. Yasser Arafat's Fatah trained IRA operatives during the 60s. A Palestinian sniper in Ofra was allegedly trained by the IRA, and pipe bombs made by the IRA were found in Jenin in 2002. So, one could say that a recently formed bond of terrorism, that is to say, a bond based on violent terror fueled by hatred and destruction, is the only real link or overlap between our two peoples. And it's amazing how the majority of people in the south of Ireland, regardless of their quietly held sympathies to Catholics in the north, distinguish greatly between the old IRA of the 1920s and the provisional IRA in the north, celebrating the former in history curricula but condemning the latter as terrorists. Notwithstanding such antipathy toward our own terrorists here, we seem to celebrate, vindicate, and excuse the most heinous actions of Hamas as understandable and resistance. How is this? How, despite all the data outlined here, the historical connections, the overlapping causes and commonality of purposes between the Irish and the Jewish people, do the Irish above all side with the perpetrator rather than the true victims of genocide, apartheid and oppression? One possible answer to that question lies in Joseph Pearce's explanation of the seeing stones, the so-called Palantir, in The Lord of the Rings.
In The Lord of the Rings, there is something called the Palantir stones. The thing is that he's seeing stones, but the thing is that what you see, it's not that it's untrue in the sense that it's a complete lie, but you only see what the power that controls the stone wants you to see. So what you're seeing is a distorted version of reality, in other words, propaganda. And Denethor in The Lord of the Rings spent so much time looking into the Palantir that he becomes completely convinced that Sauron, Satan, is going to win. And although he doesn't support Satan necessarily, but he thinks, well, his power is pointless trying to resist the power of evil because it's going to win. He despairs. So what people don't realize, and Tolkien was a linguist, the word Palantir in Elvish means far-seeing or far-seer. The German word for TV is Fernsehen, which means far-seeing. But the English word for television, tele, is Greek for far, vision, video, Latin for to see. So the English word for television is far-seeing. So this is a linguistic joke by Tolkien. In the very early days of television, he was writing this, by the way, it was very much new technology, that TV was the Palantir stone. So why would you want to have a Palantir stone in the middle of your home that you consult regularly? Why would you want that?
Only the other day I called into a friend's house. The news was on and video footage of displaced Gazans was playing. Terrible. You might say the media is doing its job, highlighting the plight of the downtrodden in Gaza. But why do we never hear or see anything of the 500,000 citizens killed in Syria by Assad and the regime that succeeded him, or the 377,000 killed in Yemen by the Houthis, or the 150,000 killed in Sudan, or the tens of thousands of Christians killed every year across Africa at the hands of radical Islamists such as Boko Haram? Why is it only Israel? Israel, who engages in war solely to defend its own existence. Is it any wonder why, like Denethor in The Lord of the Rings, so many Irish people have a distorted view of reality? In addition to selective reporting, there is another strategy used by everyone, from ordinary Gazan citizens to aid workers and medics to members of erstwhile respectable media institutions, that of telling lies, an industry of lies, as the Czech writer and Cold War expert Alex Alvorova put it. You're being a conspiracist now, like. I am, but the conspiracy is out in the open for everyone to see, or at least for those who can. On July 23rd, the New York Times published a powerful photo of a Gazan boy said to be suffering from famine. The mother is holding the suffering boy in her arms. His body is emaciated. You might compare it to the Pieta, the Virgin Mother holding the dead Christ close to her bosom. The article attributed the child's condition to the Israeli-induced famine. In a matter of days, images made the rounds online. Images depicting the suffering child's sibling, standing perfectly healthy next to the bed by his mother's side. The existence of this image forced the New York Times to tell the truth. The child had cerebral palsy and hypoxemia, serious medical conditions that explain his appearance but were not mentioned in the original report. His condition had nothing to do with food shortage. This is but one example of many, but it belies the industry of lies that is required for such anti-Israel propaganda to spread around the globe. How many people had to lie by way of omission, in order for that photo to make the front page of the New York Times? The mother of the child, the photographer taking the photo, the nurses and doctors tending to the child, the New York Times editorial staff. The list could go on, and this is but one example. And the sad fact of the matter is that some 40% of marriages in Gaza are consanguineous, resulting in higher than normal levels of children born with biological abnormalities. And remember the images in the news of children pressing up against a barrier with empty pots begging for food. Another image, subsequently made available online, undermined this starvation narrative and prompted investigations by German outlets Bild and Süddeutsche Zeitung, which found that some widely shared Gaza hunger photos, such as children posing with empty pots, were arranged to evoke a powerful emotional reaction from the audience. They also noted that the photographer's own social media activity raised questions about his neutrality. A video along the same lines later surfaced on X. If the war were not such a serious event, you might even say this video was funny. In it, children are pressing up against a barrier with empty pots, screaming for food. One of the children, however, a little girl, gave the game away. In between screaming, she laughs and smiles. Evidently the scene is a stunt, and she can't keep a straight, or should I say, sad face. Then there are the images of doctors removing bullets from children. Bullets that apparently hit their target, but don't explode on impact, and are extracted, all shiny and new. And amazingly, the cameras are always around to capture these heart-wrenching scenes. The ambulance driver speeding along the road while administering CPR to a seemingly dying infant. Of course, any thinking adult would ask why the person filming the scene didn't think to put down his phone to administer CPR and let the ambulance driver drive. But who cares? And then, of course, the parents of allegedly dead children. I'm a parent myself, and I hope to God I never have to see one of my children die before me. But if that day were to come, the last thing I'd want is someone filming it, much less posting it online for some cause, however great or otherwise. What parent in their right mind would acquiesce to such a thing in the middle of their grief? None of this is to say that people in Gaza haven't lost loved ones, even children, or that people's lives haven't been turned upside down by this war. Rather, the reality of the war is one thing, and our mass media filtered perception of it is quite another, and that discrepancy can only be attributed to the industry of lies.